I am 89 years old. And for most of my life, I was terrified of dying. I want to be honest about that, because I think most people my age are, and nobody says it out loud. People kept asking me if my faith made it easier. Church people. Well-meaning people. They wanted the answer to be yes. And for a long time I gave them something close to yes, because I didn't want to disappoint anyone. I didn't want to be the 89-year-old woman who looked death in the eye and said, "Religion didn't fix this for me." But here's what nobody tells you. The fear didn't leave because I found something to believe in. It left because I finally stopped carrying things I was never supposed to be carrying in the first place. That is what I want to talk to you about today. Not God. Not heaven. Not doctrine. Those are your private matters and I would never touch them. What I want to talk about is the weight. The specific, nameable weight that most of us drag through our entire lives, and what happens to the fear of death when you finally set it down. Because I did. At 89, the fog lifted. And what I can see now, clearly, for the first time, I want you to see it too. And you don't have to wait until you're 89 to get there. The first thing I released, the need to be remembered the right way. I spent decades worried about what people would say at my funeral. Not whether they'd show up, whether they'd say the right things, whether the story they told about me would be the true one, whether the version of me they carried forward would match the version I believed I was. That is an exhausting thing to carry. And I carried it for 60 years. I adjusted myself constantly, said things I didn't fully mean, held back things I did mean, stayed in rooms I should have left and left rooms I should have stayed in. All in the service of managing how I would be remembered. All in the service of a reputation that, at 89, I can tell you with full confidence, it will be incomplete no matter what you do. Someone will get you wrong. Someone will reduce you. Someone will remember a version of you that you'd barely recognize. And someone who never really knew you will speak about you with enormous confidence at the very moment you are no longer there to correct them. I spent 60 years trying to prevent that. It cannot be prevented. It has never been prevented, not by a single person in the history of human beings dying. At 87, I looked at it clearly for the first time. I was not protecting my legacy. I was protecting my ego from the grief of being misunderstood. And misunderstanding is not something you can control. It never was. When I stopped trying, when I genuinely released the need to curate how I'd be remembered, something extraordinary happened. I stopped being afraid that death would end my story, because I stopped needing my story to be told correctly. The story was mine while I was living it. That was enough. You don't have to wait until 87 to put this down. You can put it down today. The second thing I released, the unlived life I kept as a wound. There was a version of my life I didn't live. I think most people have one. The path not taken. The choice that felt impossible at 29 and still sits in the chest decades later, a small, persistent ache. Mine was a place. I had wanted to spend a year in Portugal. I was 31. The money wasn't there. Then a child came. Then a move. Then another decade. And Portugal became the name I gave to everything I hadn't done, not just travel, but courage, and the self I imagined I'd be if I had only chosen differently. For 50 years, that unlived life functioned as evidence of my failure. Every time I thought about dying, I thought about Portugal. Not the country, the proof that I had been too afraid to choose myself. At 83, I understood something I should have understood at 33. The unlived life is not a wound. It is just a road you didn't take. Roads are not failures. They are just roads. The version of you that went to Portugal, or made the other choice, or left sooner, or stayed longer, that version of you also had a life full of things she didn't do. Every life is full of those roads. You are not behind. You never were. When I let Portugal go, really let it go, not just said the words but released the grief, the fear of death lost one of its biggest arguments. It had been saying, "You haven't done enough yet. You haven't become enough yet." When I stopped agreeing, the argument went quiet. You can let yours go now. Not by pretending it didn't matter. It mattered. But it is not evidence against you. It never was. The third thing I released, the responsibility for other people's peace. This is the one that will be hardest for women especially to hear. But I'll say it. I spent most of my adult life making sure that the people around me were comfortable. Not just the people I loved, the people I barely knew. I managed emotions that were not mine. I softened truths that deserved to be sharp. I made myself smaller in conversations, quieter at tables, less certain in rooms where my certainty made others uneasy. I thought that was kindness. I thought that was love. It wasn't. It was fear, the fear that if I took up my full space, people would leave. And so I spent 80 years being a slightly reduced version of myself so that the people around me could be comfortable with the amount of me they were given. At 89, with very little time for pretending, I can tell you, your full self is not too much. It was never too much. The people who needed you smaller were the ones with a problem. When I stopped managing other people's comfort, I had an enormous amount of energy I had never had before. Energy I'd been spending for decades on a job that was never mine to do. I started saying true things in my full voice. I stopped apologizing for opinions. I stopped leaving rooms I had as much right to occupy as anyone. The fear of death is partly the fear of disappearing. When you've been making yourself invisible your whole life, dying feels like it's just finishing what you started. When you stop, when you take up your full space, death stops feeling like disappearance. It feels like completion. You are allowed to take up your full space. Even now. Especially now. Here is what I found on the other side of all that releasing. Not peace. Exactly. Not what I expected. What I found was presence. The present moment became the only moment. And when the present moment is the only moment, death stops being a destination you're moving toward and starts being something that exists somewhere else, in another category entirely. I started noticing things I had missed for 80 years. The exact quality of morning light in October. The sound of rain that means stay inside. The particular way a good conversation fills a room and lingers after everyone has gone home. The way a dog looks at you when you have done nothing at all to deserve that level of trust. Small things. Embarrassingly small things. Things I had walked past for decades because I was too busy managing the other matters. The reputation, the regret, the comfort of people who would have survived just fine without my management. None of those things require me to be remembered correctly. None of them depend on Portugal. None of them need anyone to be comfortable. The present moment does not have room for the fear of death. They cannot both be fully in you at the same time. When I dropped the weight, the present rushed in. The fear had nowhere left to stand. That is the truth I couldn't find in any book or any sermon, though I looked for it in both. The fear of death is not cured by belief. It is cured by presence. And presence becomes possible when you are no longer spending all of yourself on things that were never yours to carry. I want to speak to you directly now. If you are watching this and you recognize yourself in any of what I've described, the reputation management, the unlived life held like a wound, the energy spent keeping everyone comfortable, I want you to hear this. You are allowed to put it down. Even at 60. Even at 75. Even at 89. Even today. You do not have to earn that release. You do not have to have a revelation. You do not have to go to Portugal or stop going to church or do anything dramatic at all. You only have to be willing, in this moment, to consider that the weight is optional. That you picked it up once. And that you are allowed to set it down. You will not become a worse person when you stop managing how you'll be remembered. You will become more fully the person you actually are. That person is worth knowing. That person deserves the present moment. And I would argue, I say this with all 89 years behind me, that person is more interesting, more alive, and more genuinely kind when they are not performing kindness for an audience. The fear of death is not something that gets resolved by thinking the right thoughts about death. It gets resolved by living so fully in your actual life that death simply has less and less of you to threaten. Give it less. Give yourself more. That's the truth. At 89, with everything I've seen and everyone I've buried and every version of this conversation I've had, that is the whole truth. Not religion. Not philosophy. Just the decision, made again every morning, to carry less and be here more. If something in what I said today reached you, if some part of this found a weight you've been carrying and gave you permission to look at it differently, please share this with someone who needs to hear it. Not because I need the numbers. Because there is someone in your life who is afraid, who has been afraid for a long time. And they may not know yet that the fear is not about death. It is about everything they've been holding on to that they're allowed to release. And if you want to keep having this kind of honest conversation about what it actually means to live at the end of a long life, about what falls away and what remains and what turns out to matter, subscribe. Come back. There is more to say, and I am not done saying it. We are all carrying things we were never meant to carry this far. You can put yours down now. I'll be here.